I'm glad to see so many people here tonight, because for a lot of you people that are new to the organization or new to this movement, we've been at it for about 4.5 years now. We've had some successes, we've had some failures. But we feel that what we stand for is important. And what we stand for is the future of this country. What we stand for is why America became a great country. And the big question is, are we going to be able to retain that status? Is America going to remain a great country? There's a lot of people that aren't so sure, including myself. I look at what's going on out there and I see moves by our so-called leaders. Designed for what? It certainly doesn't enhance individual freedom. It doesn't enhance free enterprise. It doesn't enhance our competitiveness as a nation. We see philosophies out there, we see politics out there, all designed to diminish what made this country great. That's why we started this organization. Some very simple philosophies. Smaller government, more individual freedom, deregulation of industry, and an absolute defense of the Constitution of the United States and all its amendments. Too often we've heard all that concept about living and breathing documents and new interpretations of old words. But I think what we have to remember is that when the Constitution was originally written, it was a result of a study of centuries of world history before that document was written. They looked at the great societies, the previous democracies in history, going back to the Greeks. They looked at the Roman Empire. They looked at all the great empires of the world. They found out why they all collapsed, inevitably collapsed. And if you look at those reasons, it always came down to the reduction of individual freedom and individual rights. So we feel strong that that so-called living and breathing document that was written 250 or so years ago, that it's still valid. It remains valid. Because it was written amongst people. And though the size of the country grows and technology changes, it's still a document written in recognition of human nature. You have to have certain sets of rules and regulations for a society. But this particular document recognized individual rights. Individual rights. You as an individual American have rights that supersede the dictates of a president, a Congress, a legislature, a governor, a county legislature, or even a town board or a school board. You have individual, inalienable rights. That's what we're here to defend. And a lot of things have been going on lately, and for those that are here for the first time, I just want to go through some of the issues that we've been following. But there's a lot of things going on right now that give us pause, that make us concerned about what's going on. And we've heard all of them. Now, obviously, a lot of people are here because of what happened in New York State with this unconstitutional ban on guns. It's one of those issues that's a defining type of an issue. The word infringement doesn't seem to echo in very many people's minds up in Albany these days, or in Washington for that matter. It's one of those defining issues that's guaranteed under the Constitution. But we've also looked at other issues. The First Amendment to the Constitution, religious freedom, the attacks of the Obama administration on the Catholic Church, for instance, dictating to them how they're going to administer health care for their particular workers, interfering with a private organization. Not acceptable. And we hear a lot of other things that are going on right now that don't seem to make much sense. How many people have been reading about sequestration? Do you remember the genesis of that and how that all came to be? We haven't had a budget in this country for almost 4 years. So a couple of people got upset about that. They went to the president and said, guess what? We want a budget. He said, oh, sure, no problem. We got plenty of time. So they said, but if we don't have a budget, what are the ramifications going to be? Well, we'll automatically revert to 2011 spending levels. Doesn't sound so crazy, does it? I mean, I know I'm on a budget that's a hell of a lot less than I was on a couple of years ago, and a lot of other people are. To be honest with you, it'd be a step up for me personally if I could get back to 2011 levels. But it's not good enough for the government. And what's really disgusting about it all is that we have, I don't even like to use this term, our president, that was a joke, yes it was, I'm sorry, who's actually sitting up there in press conferences day after day after day, saying that you're going to lose first responders, you're going to lose police services. Well, I'm not sure, but I know, Conrad, you're a first responder. Where are you? Where's your paycheck come from? I think it's the city of New York, right? No, you don't like to admit it, I know, I'm sorry.
Just like his boss.
But sequestration will come and go. But the last time I saw, the police were paid by the county. Fire departments paid locally or they volunteer. To sit there and go around and try and scare this population with lies is reprehensible. But this is the kind of situation that we're in right now. These are the type of things that we're facing. There are other issues that we've done in the last couple of years. We've worked very hard in our organization to try and fight for tax stabilization. And we worked and lobbied hard for a 2% property tax cap. That was achieved last year. I don't know if you read the paper in the last couple of days, but the New York State Teachers Association wasn't too happy with that. They're going to go to court and they want to overthrow the tax cap. Now, it exists in 22 other states, by the way, so I'm sure it probably will, sustain an attack. But imagine that. And the reason that they're having... I'm sorry, I have a hard time containing myself sometimes, but the reason that they are giving is equality between the districts. Oh, the poorer districts won't get their money. Well, first of all, that's a bunch of baloney because the state has the ability, half the money comes from the state. The state has equalized, support for districts all along. So an editorial was in the paper the other day, and they came up with their big story. And I said, geez, if you're really concerned about equalization, and you're really in favor of tax stabilization, all right, let's get rid of the 2% tax cap. How about we have a 2% salary cap? Now it's fair for everybody. Well, you know that didn't go anywhere, right? Other issues. The DREAM Act. Now, believe it or not, there's a competition now for the DREAM Act. Who's going to be first? The president or our governor? That's the race. That's the race that's going on. Who's going to be the first one to sell out? Who's going to be the first one to write this thing? Who's going to be the first one? And there seems to be a competition going on because we know our governor in this state thinks he's running for president. Now, he may do well in some of the primaries for his party, but he's not going to do too well nationally, I can tell you that, with some of these issues that he's talking about. It seems to be his dream to make New York State the ultimate sanctuary state. You've heard of sanctuary cities like San Francisco. They take everybody. They don't care where you come from. They don't care if you're legal. They don't care if you're a criminal. They don't care what it is. Okay? You get money to live, money to travel, money to go to school, whatever you want. If you're going to create that set of circumstances, what's our state going to look like in a couple of years? Well, why? Why would a governor do something like that? Because he's running for president and he has to run in the Democratic primaries in a couple of years and he's catering to his base. He doesn't give a damn what it's going to do to our state or what it's going to do to our quality of life. Agenda 21. Some people know about that, some don't. But I don't know if a lot of people even noticed or not. There'll be a little more later on this in the program. But there are some of these master planners out there, national, statewide, regional, who seem to think that the future of where we live, Long Island in particular, and rural places, have to change. They feel that we all need to live in urban environments because there's more people per square foot in an urban environment, thus you have a smaller footprint on the planet. And what they're using is the concept of sustainability to propose dozens of high-density, stack and pack, mixed-use housing projects on Long Island. You're going to hear a little bit later from the Huntington Civic Association and the Ronkonkoma Civic Association on what that's going to mean to their neighborhoods. High-density, high-rise, mixed-use, urban projects in rural and suburban communities. That is the goal. And we will discuss more of that later, but this is another issue that we're fighting that's extremely important, that's going to have a big impact as we go forth. We all know what's going on right now with Obamacare. Now, I guess Pelosi was right. You got to pass it to see what's in it. But we're finding out what's in it. And we're finding out that there's going to be a mass degradation in the mental care, the health care of Americans around this country. It hasn't even been implemented yet. But a lot of the rules and regulations are being thrust upon doctors, affecting costs, affecting the way they are paid, and affecting how your care is being administered. These are important issues. We all know about the housing crisis. Well, the housing crisis was a bubble created by what? How many people know? Did you ever hear of the Community Reinvestment Act? It's about a 22-year-old piece of legislation. It started with about 4 or 5 pages like this. And it said, very simply, if you're going to have a bank in a community, you need to lend to people in that community. Sounds fair. 15 years later, in 1999, they had amended the heck out of that thing so that the pile of paper is probably higher than me. And one of the pieces of legislation and one of the pieces of laws passed in 1999 was that 52% of the mortgages from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, by law, had to be subprime mortgages. In other words, mortgages to people that likely would not pay them back. And less than 6 or 7 years later, lo and behold, crash. The crash was manufactured by the Congress of the United States.
Cuomo.
And Cuomo.
Yes, Cuomo was on Housing and Urban Development at the time, by the way. We were going to point that out, but okay, you got me on that one. And I'm glad everybody is so, good on those issues. But this was a manufactured crisis, and it's not fixed yet. You would think that after this housing crisis and this bubble, it just would be logical. Maybe the regulators would go back and they'd take a look at that document and say, maybe it should change. It really didn't work. No. Not changed a bit. In fact, they made it worse. Because people who are now qualifying for mortgages can actually use welfare checks, unemployment benefits as income to qualify for their loans. I kid you not. What is the purpose of that? This is all part of the social engineering. They think everybody should have a house, whether you can afford it or not. And the rest of us are paying the price because this economy has been in the crapper now for 3.5 years, the longest sustained recession that we've ever had. Because one of the primary tenets of investments in the middle class has always been home ownership. When I was growing up, you go and you buy a house, you pay it off for 30 years, you got $200,000 or $300,000 in equity by the time you're 50 or 60 years old, and you have something. You can borrow against it. And if you look at the current banking laws, since Dodd-Frank went in, try and turn the equity into your house into money. Try it. If you haven't paid massive amounts of taxes last year, you're not going to qualify. In the old days, if you had a couple of $1,000,000 in the bank and you wanted to borrow $500,000 on your house and you had $500,000 or $600,000 in equity, it was a no-brainer. Come on in. We have the asset. You can afford it. You can afford to pay it back. But they changed the rules. If you didn't make that money in the last year, you don't qualify. Think about it. You talk about why we have this long-term recession. And one of the reasons is that money is not flowing. And all through history, not history, American history, you would buy a home. You would pay that home off for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You'd build up equity in your house. Maybe you wanted to put on an addition. Maybe you want to send your kids to school. What do? You're back and you take a second mortgage, you refinance, you do a cash-out refi. Gone. Gone, because anybody who paid for a mortgage or bought a house in the last 5 or 6 years was subject to the prices of the housing bubble. They've lost 10, 20, or 30, or in some parts of the country, 50% of the value on their house. That's equity. You can't turn equity into cash. Now you have less equity. They wonder why we don't have cash flowing in this economy. So don't kid yourself about the housing market and the housing crisis. It is not over. It is not over. And the number of people who are sitting on upside-down mortgages and the number of people who are waiting for foreclosures to close is astronomical. And this government's covering that up. It's all part of the assault on the middle class. And it seems that that's the way it's going. Anybody who has a job out there getting W-2 income, you saw the hit on your paycheck. My daughter called me up. She said, "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I said, "I don't know. It's a little bit of Obamacare, a little bit of paying off the national debt, a little bit of paying off the..." Oh. Obama goes around for the last 2 years. He said, "We're not going to tax the middle class." Oh, really? Well, they don't call it a tax. See, that's what it is. It's a surcharge here, and it's an Obama thing here, and it's an expense there. So these are other issues that need to be concerned with. And also just take a look at the general condition of our economy in the country as it stands in the world. Anybody know what's happening with the dollar? Anybody know what's going on in China these days? I'm sure people in this room are aware of it. You know the Chinese are buying up gold? They're building gold mines around the world. Why are they doing that? That's right. That's right. Because they're going to put the dollar out of business. They're going to put the dollar out of business. The dollar is going to be substituted for as the monetary standard. And we're going to be sitting there, we're going to be trading in yen or whatever the heck they call their money over there. But they're going to back it up. They're backing it up with gold. They can back up their economy and they can back up their currency. And once that happens, where are we? You know, we're buying all those cheap Chinese goods right now. How much do you think those things are going to be in a couple of years? There are major things that are going on right now that show that this country is on a downward spiral. And the reason I wanted to have this meeting tonight and invited so many people and so many organizations that are here tonight, we'll have some of them address you later, is because we're all going to have to come together to fight these things. There's not one issue, there's a dozen issues, 2 dozen issues. And if you get into state, local, and corruption and everything else, there's 100 issues. But unless we show some solidarity and we can get some people together to make noise, to knock on the door, and to make these people accountable for their actions, we're just along for the ride. We're along for the ride, and we're going to be on that slippery slope down to what a lot of the other great civilizations have done. And that's the reason we started this organization. I just wanted to, for those of you who have, been members for a long time, you've heard this before and you know what it's all about. But I see a lot of new faces here tonight, and I wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that there are very, very important issues here, and we all need to come together, and all organizations need to work together. So, we did change the theme, or at least our motto, I suppose it was. When we first started the organization, we just throw the bums out. And we did throw out a lot of bums. 2010 wasn't really a bad year. Turned the House of Representatives around. In New York State, we picked up a couple of senators who did a pretty good job. We got some town board people elected that were doing a good job. But it's just a small beginning. So what we did is we changed our name, our motto. From throw the bums out to we will not comply. Now what do we mean by that? I think that's what we mean by it. Okay? There are a lot of things that can be done and a lot of things that can't be done. But at some point we're going to have to make a stand. At some point we're going to have to make a stand and say we're not going to comply. We're not going to comply with things that are bad for this country. Bad for us as individuals. The gun issue is one of those. Who the hell is Cuomo to come in here and say we got to register this, register that, turn a bunch of law-abiding citizens into criminals? People have never committed crimes. People have never used their guns in violence. People who use them for self-defense or hunting or for leisure or for pleasure. Who the hell is the governor to come in here and say for obvious political reasons that he's going to come in here and pass these laws? I mean, he could do it, because he did. But how did he do it? In the dead of night, with the doors closed. Senators and assemblymen that didn't read the bill, because it wasn't available. The methods for passing this legislation is probably as bad as the legislation itself, which, by the way, is horrible, and we'll discuss that a little more later. But we're going to have to make a little change in, I guess, our attitudes. Maybe that's what it is. We have to be a little more in their face. And we started that last week. We had a couple of rallies, for those of you that have been involved. We did a pro-gun rally up in Huntington a couple of weeks ago. Got some great coverage. It's on News 12. If you didn't see it, go to the website, the CSA website. You can take a look. And last week we called for Dean Skelos to step down as a majority leader. And the press came out and they said, "Oh, why do you want him to step down?" So I said, "Well, I got a little document for you." Of course, you only get 5 seconds on air, but. And I said, CSA opposes the legislation and the actions of Dean Skelos and Andrew Cuomo for the following reasons. The law as written will not save lives. The intent of the legislation is to provide Cuomo with a progressive issue that he can use to excite his liberal base in anticipation of a presidential run. Skelos should not have been a party to such blatant political actions, especially by a liberal progressive like Cuomo. Now remember who elected Skelos. In his district, the guy carries an R, C, and an I. That's Republican, Conservative, Independent. That's who elected him. He ran on that platform. He ran on a conservative platform. There is absolutely no excuse for him to do this except he made a political deal of some type. The use of the letters of necessity, which is an action by the government, it's sort of an emergency power that the governor has to move legislation in an emergency. You know, like natural disaster maybe a nuclear attack, maybe foreign aggression. But to pass a bill? He used letters of necessity, which again is the emergency powers, to bypass public input on this bill. Skelos went along with it. Now, a lot of people say, why are you picking on Skelos and not Cuomo? Well, we know where Cuomo's coming from. It's like going to Obama and saying, listen, you know, we don't want Obamacare. I mean, you know, that's dead on arrival. But we expect and hold some of these other people in the Senate, especially Skelos, again, looking at who elected him, to a higher standard. So yeah, there is a double standard, yes. I expect that somebody who's elected as conservative Republican acts and votes like a conservative Republican. If he doesn't, he has to be kicked out of office. Additional points. Members of the Senate and Assembly had no time to read the bill. Very few even had the opportunity to participate in the discussion. Skelos especially was responsible for this, and the resulting bill needs massive amendments. He has already flip-flopped on this issue of magazine size and suggested that it could be changed, and they've already come up, and I've already seen the draft resolutions of 30 different amendments. They knew going in that this legislation was a rotten piece of legislation. As far as we're concerned, amendments is not going to do it. It must be repealed. And the other reason we're opposed to it is very similar to what we talked about, the CRA before. A piece of legislation starting with 3 or 4 pages turned into 30 or 40,000. That's what this document does. That's what this piece of legislation does. It creates a document that can be amended and added to and changed, creating that slippery slope that's going to be finally, what? Confiscation? We know that that's the end. We know that that's the end. That's where they're going with this. And once you create the document by amendment, and you know how they do it already, you do an omnibus bill, and down at the last line, at 50 or 60 pages of a piece of legislation is 2 or 3 paragraphs amending that other piece of legislation. They don't even know it's there. This is the method by which they operate. We think that's inappropriate. We think that bill should have been voted on in separate segments. There were 6 major segments to it. They should have been held out individually. As far as we're concerned, a guy like Dean Skelos failed. He failed us, and he failed our organization. Because one of the things we did in 2010 is we worked very hard to get a couple of people elected to the Senate up there so that there would be a conservative majority in the Senate to act as a check and balance against Cuomo and the progressives in New York City. And we were very happy we did that. But Skelos, under his supposed leadership, blew that in less than 2 years. Less than 2 years. We handed this guy a majority. He couldn't even hold it together. So it's a failure of leadership. So the reason we're picking on him, I think it's a justified reason that we're picking on him. So if anybody asks you, Now you know. This document, by the way, is available on the website. If you go to the Second Amendment page on the website, you'll see this document. So if you need that, you can